Hello, and welcome to our webinar, HR and Benefits Compliance Steps to Protect Your Business. I'm Lillian Shapiro, and let's get started. We're going to be talking about two commonly misunderstood healthcare reform requirements. One relates to small business and healthcare reform, and the next one is a pretty common practice that a lot of folks out there don't understand is not in compliance with healthcare reform, or as we call it, the Affordable Care Act. And that's paying for individual health insurance premiums, and we're going to look at a little bit more detail about these two. First of all, the good news. Small employers are not required to offer health insurance. Companies with fewer than 50 full-time employees or full-time equivalent employees, FTEs, are not required to offer health insurance. That's very simple, very straightforward. Now, if a lot of folks out there who have 50 or more full-time employees, those folks will be liable for a pay-or-play penalty under ACA or the Affordable Care Act if they do not offer affordable health insurance that provides a minimum level of coverage to full-time employees and their dependents. So that requirement to comply with providing health insurance, affordable health insurance, I should say, under the Affordable Care Act or healthcare reform does kick in when that employer has reached 50 full-time employees, including FTEs. So very important to remember that. If you're smaller than that, do not have to offer any kind of group health insurance at all. It's up to the individual employer. Now, sometimes as companies grow, and hopefully everybody out there is continuing to grow in their path and add more employees, if you're afraid that you might be approaching that number 50 threshold, 50 employees, you really have to track across the board. Employers should carefully calculate their average number of full-time employees and FTEs across the months in each calendar year to determine their applicable large employer status for the next year. In general, an employee is full-time for a calendar month, or if he or she averages at least 30 hours of service per week or 130 hours per month. Now, just to remind you, for all the folks listening out there, and hopefully you're on your HR library, there is a whole section related to pay or play under healthcare reform. So please review. All the rules and guidelines are broken out, as well as some very handy calculators that will help you figure out the status of your company as it relates to being a large employer, as well as a number of other very, very important areas of compliance. So please be sure to visit. So we're going to continue on, and we're going to go to the next slide, which is paying for individual health insurance premiums, and why and what makes them non-compliant with the Affordable Care Act or ACA. Arrangements under which an employer uses its funds to directly pay the premium for an individual health insurance policy covering an employee, or reimburses an employee for some or all of a premium expense, is called under the Affordable Care Act an employer payment plan. And here's the important information you need to know. Regardless of whether you treat the money that's being given as pre-tax or post-tax to the employee, employer payment plans are generally considered group health plans and are not compliant under the Affordable Care Act. Now, you might say to yourself, well, why is it considered a group health plan if you're paying for individual health insurance coverage? It's just the way the law is written. It's called an employer payment plan. You cannot pay for individual health insurance policy premium. That's the rule under the ACA. Now, not only is it a rule under the ACA, the penalties are pretty serious. Such arrangements may be subject to a $100 per day excise tax per applicable employee, which is up to $36,500 per year per employee under the federal tax code. So this is not one of those requirements that you're going to want to comply with this. You don't want to take a chance. You want to make sure you're in compliance, because the tax penalty is, especially with this one, is so serious. And even if you might have done it in the past or are thinking of doing it or considering doing it, please remember the amount of tax penalty, and then speak to somebody who whether it's a benefits counselor or a benefits expert, before you ever consider anything related to cash, related to individual premiums or anything along those lines, any kind of cash payment plan. You want to be sure you're in compliance. Now, what can you do if you want to help your employees and you don't have a group health plan? Well, you can increase everybody's compensation for whatever amount that you think that you can afford. Absolutely, that's fine. However, there's a big but here. However, you cannot endorse a particular policy or issuer of health insurance. You can't say to your folks, oh, here's an additional compensation. Please consider using this to purchase health coverage, health insurance coverage. That's not allowed. You can give employee compensation increases, but you can't tie it to anything related to payment of health insurance in any way or recommendations in any way, shape, or form. So as long as you don't tie it to anything and just give a compensation increase, that's fine. Now, due to the potential for significant penalties, as we talked about, if you've got any questions about this, please be sure to consult a knowledgeable benefits counsel or benefits expert on this because of the seriousness of the penalties, and perhaps if there's any confusion at all, that's your safest way to go. Now we're going to talk about common benefits notices mistakes. Now, if you provide an ERISA-covered group health insurance plan to your employees, all participants must receive from you, typically you're the plan administrator, if you're an employer who's sponsoring, a summary plan description or an SPD. This is an ERISA required document, and it must be distributed in a timely fashion to your plan participants. And a lot of people think, well, gee, the carrier is just giving out some benefit summaries and additional information, and they can go online many times and just see what they're entitled to. That must be a summary plan description. And the answer to that would be no, in most cases, because the carriers typically don't provide all the ERISA required provisions that must be in a summary plan description. So if you're ever audited by the Department of Labor for audit of your welfare benefit plan, and they ask for, and they do, during an audit like this, they do ask for a summary plan description, and you don't have one, your audit will not end until you have one. So please be sure to double check with your carrier to make sure that, in fact, they have not given you a summary plan description. More than likely they won't. And please be sure that you get a hold of one, because if you don't, you will not be in compliance, and if you're audited, that will be a serious issue if you don't provide the documents that they are requesting. So very, very important to clear up that confusion. Companies with 20 or more employees must provide their employees with required notices regarding continuation of health coverage under COBRA. Now, bottom line is on your HR library, we have a whole great section on COBRA as it relates to not explaining the whole thing and the notices that must be distributed. It's all there under employee benefits. In the left-hand navigation, you've got COBRA, and just click on that, and everything you need will be there. Now, the next one is a little bit different. It relates to mini COBRA laws, and these are state laws related to continuation of coverage. Generally speaking, they're for employees with they're for employers who have less than 20 employees. So even though you don't have to comply with the federal laws under COBRA because you don't have 20 or more employees, if you've got less, more than likely your state has continuation of benefits requirements, and they must be followed, quite simply. And where you get those is you simply, in your HR library, you click on the state law section in your top navigation, and then on the left-hand navigation, go to continuation of benefits or continuation of coverage, and you will see, if there are, it will be noted what the particular guidelines are for your state. So very important to remember, regardless of whether you have 20 or more, there are typically very specific guidelines statewide if you have less than 20 employees, so please be sure to check it out. Hiring do's and don'ts. Make sure all interview questions are appropriate and relate directly to the position and the applicant's ability to perform the job's essential functions. Now, really what this comes down to is it's really all about the job and whether the candidate can perform that job. That's really what an interview really, in its kind of the heart of the interview, what you want to accomplish in terms of really understanding, can this candidate do the job? What you don't want is, kind of in a small phrase, I'll describe it, small talk questions. If you get into areas like, hey, where you're from, do you have a family, you could be, in fact, breaching anti-discrimination laws. And I'll get to that in the next bullet that we're going to be going to, but you want to avoid small talk because that can lead to possible discriminatory questions, and you just don't want to go there. You want to keep it compliant, and that's why you want to stay job-centric. You want to make sure your questions do not discriminate based on race, sex, religion, age, ethnic group, national origin, marital status, military service, disabilities, or other protected status. You just want to make sure that everything that you do really stays focused on the job or the ability to perform the job, and then you're safest. Now, again, your HR library will have lots of great information, guidelines, do's and don'ts, how to get through the process, under the hiring section of the library. So please be sure to go there. So important. And there's a HR apps and tools section. There's an interview question builder. All good ways to make sure that you're staying compliant when you're developing those interview questions. Now, if you're doing a background check of a candidate, be sure to have written permission from the candidate and all Fair Credit Reporting Act requirements, we say FACRA requirements, make sure they're satisfied, along with any state requirements for conducting background checks. So again, guidelines are found on your HR library as it relates to background checks. And the bottom line for all of this is that if you're conducting a background check, you will not be in compliance with federal law if you don't get that written permission from the candidate. Now, typically, you want to check with your background check company. You want to just speak with them and discuss whether or not they can actually provide the proper required documentation. If not, it can be downloaded from the library. But what you really want to make sure about is that you get that permission form signed and you're in compliance, because without that, that's a serious issue. Please remember that in any future background checks. Now, there are some other sensitive areas related to drug testing, arrest and conviction records, and other areas like that. You want to make sure you're in compliance with federal and state law as well. Again, you can refer to the library or any, if you really want to chat more about it, you can certainly talk to your state labor department and so forth. Those are all options, but you really want to make sure that you know what the federal and state guidelines are as it relates to these very sensitive areas. And because the last thing you want to do is do something that is not in compliance, and if that person has any understanding of these requirements and you've done something wrong, you're putting your business at risk. So you really want to make sure you comply. And here's another one, Form I-9 or Forms I-9, if you've got to complete a whole bunch of them for new employees. They have to be completed within 3 business days from the first day of work for pay. So basically what we're saying here is that this is something you should take very seriously. You keep them in an organized place, preferably in a locked cabinet, but please don't think that, oh, geez, it's another government form. You must do these. Do this, complete this Form I-9 within 3 business days from the first day of work for pay. And additionally, there are a lot of state requirements related to new hire reporting, and of course, necessary tax forms such as Form W-4 and any other required state forms. So it's very important that you really understand as you go through the hiring process and the new hires that you're bringing in, that there are a number of different forms that must be filled out. Please be sure you do so. Another area that gets a lot of confusion, or as we say, misclassifying, is as it relates to employees, whether they're full-time or are they really independent contractors. And there's some very distinct differences between the two, and we're going to review those. These are guidelines that will help you to properly classify employees versus independent contractors, because if you don't do it correctly and you've got an independent contractor who really falls, you'll see, into the definitions that we're going to be providing to you, that means that they're entitled to benefits. That means that payroll taxes are picked up by the employer. So you really have to know the difference between who's truly an independent contractor and who's a full-time employee, and we're going to give you the tools to do that. So in determining whether the person providing service is an employee or an independent contractor, all information that provides evidence of the degree of control or independence must be considered. So the more control you have over that employee, the more likely that or I should say the independent contractor, the more likely that independent contractor is a full-time employee. So it's just logical. If you've got total control, that's typically an employee. What they do every day, how they do it, when they come to work, how much they're being paid. Of course, that's a relatively easy one. But if you call somebody an independent contractor and they do the same thing, that's a different story. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So there's 5 different areas that we're going to touch on: financial, employee benefits, availability in the marketplace, types of relationship, behavioral. So let's take them one at a time. Behavioral, in terms of, does the company control or have the right to control what the worker does and how the worker does his or her job? An employee, as mentioned, is generally subject to the business's instructions about when, where, and how. So important point to remember: if you're really controlling things, more than likely that's an employee. Financial. Are the business aspects of the worker's job controlled by the payer, the employer? That includes things like how the worker is paid, whether expenses are reimbursed, who provides tools and supplies. An employee is generally guaranteed a regular wage amount for an hourly or weekly or other period of time. This usually indicates that a worker is an employee even when the wage or salary is supplemented by a commission. So when you're basically controlling the amount of money that's paid, week in and week out or month in and month out, generally speaking, it's an employee. And an independent contractor is usually paid by a flat fee for the job. However, it is common in some professions, such as law, to pay independent contractors hourly. So the more it looks like that person really has other clients besides you because they're being paid as a flat fee for the job, or if it's hourly for an attorney or an accountant, you kind of understand that scenario. But typically there are other clients out there. It's pretty easy to see that somebody is providing a fee for service as an independent contractor if they've got lots of other clients and you're one of them, essentially. Employee benefits, including, employees that generally get their insurance, their pension plans, vacation, sick days, disability, and businesses generally do not grant these benefits to an independent contractor. However, it's important to note that just because they're not getting those benefits doesn't mean that that independent contractor is not an employee, because again, if you're controlling everything about what they're doing day in and day out from their time standpoint, from a financial standpoint, you're just not giving them any benefits, that doesn't mean that they're not an employee. It just means it's one of the factors to consider. It's all about, do you really control what that person does day in and day out, benefits being just one of the aspects. Type of relationship. If you hire a worker with the expectation that the relationship will continue indefinitely rather than for a specific project or period of time, it's generally considered evidence the intent was to create an employer-employee relationship. Generally, with a consultant, there is a finite amount of time. If there isn't, you better start checking those contracts and documentation, because that's another kind of piece of the puzzle that will give you more guidance as to whether this independent contracting relationship is in fact, in reality, a full-time employee relationship. And finally, availability in the marketplace. An independent contractor is generally free to seek out business opportunities. They may have a storefront location, website, lots of other good things. But if they're readily promoting themselves in the marketplace, whether on the web or with a physical location or otherwise, generally that's a good sign that that person, and has other clients, by the way, that's very important to know, that they're conducting themselves as an independent business. New employee orientation. We all know as employers how important it is to not only hire new employees and train them and build a relationship, but the strength of that relationship is so important to the future success of that company, because the more that you invest in the employee, the more that you do to support them, and then they turn into a great employee, being super productive and really supporting the company, that's a wonderful thing. But if the relationship isn't being built the way you'd like to see it, and you lose new employees, you see kind of a revolving door, or you're heartbroken maybe if you invested so much in supporting or training an employee and then they leave for somewhere else, it definitely has a significant impact. So the stronger the relationship is, the better. And there's no better way to do that from the day one of your new employee orientation, or we call onboarding, because you're starting to build your employee relationship right from the minute they set foot through the door. And here's how this is basically what we're talking about. Your new employee orientation steps should include assigning one of your employees to show your new hire the new workplace environment, make introductions, respond to any questions. This makes them feel welcome and part of their new workplace family. Very important to start strengthening that relationship. Encourage your team to welcome, reach out, and support the new employee. Create a first impression by making sure the employee's work location or workspace is clean and organized. In other words, you're showing right away how much you care about their comfort, about welcoming them, and having everything organized. Continuing on this path, be sure that access to the company's network or intranet, email, and phone extensions is all set up for your new employee, and that goes the same for building passes, parking passes, and so on. If you're providing an employee handbook, make sure it's ready and distributed along with your benefits information packet. Now, you don't necessarily, the benefits information packet, some people say, well, do I have to include that in the handbook? Absolutely not. You can absolutely make that a separate little package just on its own. Make sure you provide safety training. There's nothing more important than keeping your employees safe. And supervise all new employees to make sure they can completely handle all tasks assigned to them, and that's code for training. So again, it's what I mentioned from the outset in this area. If you're going to be investing and spending time and money and effort to support them, please do so and make sure that they can do their job well, so you're positioning your new employees for success. Now we're going to talk about providing an employee handbook. There are a number of different areas here that I'm going to talk about as far as what potentially can be in a new handbook, from general employment information, anti-discrimination policies, compensation, work schedules, standard of conduct, safety and security, computers and technology, employee benefits, leave policies. There is a template that's customizable in your forms section of your HR library. There's also an employee handbook builder in the HR apps and tools section. So all in all, we've got some great support for you on the system so that you can turn to that if you want to. But I'm just going to give you some guidelines right now in this presentation. I'm going to talk about some of the most important, that's anti-discrimination policies. As an employer, you must comply with the Equal Employment Opportunity laws prohibiting discrimination and harassment, including the Americans with Disabilities Act. Your employee handbook should include a section about these laws and how you expect your employees to comply. This section is also a good place to set out your sexual harassment prevention policy, any affirmative action policies, any statement that your company's in compliance with all employment discrimination and related legal requirements. Super important. Compensation. Clearly explain to your employees that your company will make necessary deductions for federal and state taxes, as well as voluntary deductions for the company's benefits programs. In addition, you may outline your company's legal obligations related to overtime pay, pay schedules, and bonus compensation. Work schedules. Describe your company's policies regarding work hours, schedules of attendance, punctuality, reporting absences, and guidelines related to if there's any flexible schedules or telecommuting, if offered. Standards of conduct. Make sure you set expectations for how you want employees to conduct themselves in your workplace, from dress code to ethics. In addition, it's important to remind your employees of any legal obligations they may have that they may need to comply with on the job. For example, if your company has legal obligations related to protecting customer data. Safety and security. Describe your company's policies for creating a safe and secure work environment, including compliance with OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration laws, that require employees to report all accidents, injuries, potential safety hazards, safety suggestions, and health and safety-related issues to management. Safety policy should also include your company's policies regarding bad weather and hazardous community conditions. If there's a blizzard that hits your town, or if there's just bad roads due to inclement weather, whatever it may be, make sure there's proper communication. At the end of the day, you want to protect your employees, whatever the situation is. Certainly if there's areas related to bad winter storms and so forth. Employee benefits, as mentioned, include details in your company's benefit programs, eligibility, requirements, all of that, workers' comp insurance, COBRA. You may wish, as I mentioned before, to create that as a separate booklet or package, or it could be included in your handbook. That would be up to you. The employee benefit section should also outline your plans for retirement, employee assistance, tuition reimbursement, business travel, and any other fringe benefits your business might provide to attract and retain employees. Obviously, it will vary and differ from employer to employer. Leave policies. Your company's leave policies should be carefully documented, especially those that are required by law. Family Medical Leave Act, jury duty, military leave, time off for jury duty, and voting should all be documented to comply with federal, state, and local laws and regulations. In addition, if you do have policies related to vacation, holiday, bereavement, sick leave, they should be explained. But let me just say that certain ones, such as jury duty, invariably will have, in many states, a state-related area. So please be sure to check the state laws on when you're putting together the handbook on your HR library, because many of these are covered in your state laws section in your HR library. So just continuing on, performance reviews. Review and update employee job descriptions at least annually. Keep accurate documentation regarding the performance for each employee. This documentation should be direct, factual, and detail-oriented to support disciplinary or other personnel decisions. Now, what we're talking about here is quite simple. Let's say you did a performance review, and by the way, there are performance review builders and lots of great on the system under HR apps and tools, and lots of great performance review forms that you can take advantage of. But you want to be factual and you want to be accurate. So if you basically, let's say, are not happy with a few different types of areas of an employee's performance, and you don't document them, but then you end up terminating that employee 6 months later because it just gets worse and worse, and all you had is one performance review that basically said they did a great job, that could be grounds for wrongful termination because there's nothing in there in writing that said that there were specific issues. So issues, one at a time, must be clearly and concisely documented. You should base employee performance reviews on specific job-related criteria. Feedback should be honest, factual, and complete. And just wrapping up a little bit, make sure, again, that your job descriptions and goals that are provided are also that are provided at the beginning of the job when the employee started is updated as you go through the year, and you are also providing those to the employee as well as any ongoing feedback. So they really should know, bottom line is, if the job description has changed and different responsibilities are basically now being included, or a change of responsibilities, in all fairness to the employee, please make sure that they get that updated job description and further feedback as the year goes on if there's anything that needs to be done or changed. Keep the review process and systems for measuring performance fair and equitable for all employees. Everybody should be treated equally for all different circumstances, but certainly performance reviews are one of them. Everybody needs to have that equal and fair treatment across the board. Termination and discipline. Review all discipline, investigation, and termination procedures to make sure they're in compliance with the applicable federal and state laws. And and this is in bold, and enforce them fairly and consistently. This is just the kind of mantra across the board. Be fair, be equitable, be consistent. So you cannot be accused in any way, shape, or form of treating some employees one way and others another way. Now, again, on your online HR library, there are great areas related to disciplining, investigation, and termination steps that are all there to help you stay in compliance. Be sure policies and procedures for handling employee disciplinary actions and investigations are clearly defined, written, and communicated to employees as appropriate. One of the ones that is featured on the HR library is progressive disciplining, where first there's a verbal warning, then there is a written warning notice provided to the employee, and then a second written warning notice, and ideally they should be signed by the employee as well, and those get then put into the personnel file in a lock cabinet, and then you have documentation. It's so important to document every single aspect of termination and discipline so you have a written paper trail as to exactly what transpired. There is singularly, this is one of the most important areas, you must document in writing, step by step by step. That is for the protection of the employer, the employees, and for all involved. Very important. Now, just to continue on, termination meetings. Inform the employee of the termination, discuss the return of company property, and deliver the final paycheck, and facilitate the employee's departure. Provide departing employees with a written summary of accrued benefits and notices regarding post-termination benefits, including, where applicable, compensation for vacation and sick time, continuation of health coverage, severance pay, and 401k plan information. Be sure you're complying with applicable federal and state requirements. Again, you can find this information on your HR library, but it's very important. It should be done in an organized fashion so you know exactly what has to be given to the employee upon termination, as well as conducting the termination meeting in a professional manner. And just continuing on, make sure policies are in place for collecting keys and other company property from the terminated employee, and confirm that access to computer systems, voicemail, and email is deactivated. Deliver final paychecks at the time of termination or as otherwise required by state law. Again, you can find this on your HR library. And this next one is very important, neutral references. The safest thing to do regarding references is what we call neutral references. So you're confirming an employee's position held, what that position was, and dates of employment upon request and in accordance with company policy. Because let's say, for example, if you had some difficulty with an employee and their new potential employer is now calling for references, and you start talking about things that didn't go well in the company and so forth, and that prevents that particular employee from getting a new job, that's not so simple. That could be complicated in terms of how you relate it, and you don't want to go there. The simplest, safest way to do it is with neutral references. Keep a summary of the meeting and any related information in the employee's personnel file. So anything related to the termination meeting and otherwise, all the way through disciplinary steps and so forth, all that kept in the employee's personnel file. So thank you very much for joining us on our webinar today, and we look forward to providing additional webinars in the future.